Bad news is part of the news cycle. People are more incentivized to click on bad news, so news agencies as well as YouTubers tend to focus on bad news because that's the ones that drive clicks. If I were to make a video about a kitten being saved on a Monday morning, most of you would not be incentivized to click. Some of you might like kittens, and so you would click, but most people wouldn't. In South Africa, though, I think the problem is that there is no good news. I've never woken up since starting to cover South African politics where I read a story and I go, wow, the government did a good job. Since starting to cover economics and politics in South Africa, I have woken up to our government basically trying to cause a war between South Africa and America, going to war with Trump, our ambassadors calling Trump a racist during a live stream and being expelled, and no new ambassadors being pushed in, our country making military alliances with Iran, our government basically just further pushing the BEE nonsense and EE and affirmative action, just time after time, week after week, day after day, bad news, and all of it driven by the government. In other countries, when you look at people like Tim Pool, for example, or you look at people like Charlie Kirk, or you look at people over in Europe, a lot of the news that they cover will be from organizations within the country that is maybe pushing culture, politics, nonsense, or social nonsense, trans stuff and gay stuff and all the rest of it. And some of it will be government-centric. Here in South Africa, the government is so busy destroying the country that almost no one else has time to even get going, right? All of the other groups that would like to destroy the country, they can't. They're also busy reeling from a bad government doing bad stuff. Today's story, no different. You all know unemployment is bad. That should come as no surprise. The Daily Investor just posted an article, and the article focuses specifically on Stanlib chief economist Kevin Lings. And it turns out that unemployment is way, way worse in South Africa than what most people actually think. You see, we've covered this on the channel before, but it's nice to know that there are actually now economists that are starting to talk about this too. Even though I know most of them already knew this, it's nice that people are starting to get this now. So South Africa has, quick economic thing here. Economic growth is incredibly important. The golden rule of thumb is that for every 1% economic growth that South Africa gets, we create about 100,000 new jobs with that 1% of economic growth. That's not great. It should be technically way higher than that, but at least that's jobs, right? We're creating about 100,000 new jobs per year at 1% growth. And in the article, they actually go over this. Back in the sort of heyday, the glory days of South Africa, when we were at about 4% of economic growth, we only added about 400,000 new jobs to the economy every single year. Actually, here we go. At the peak of South Africa's economic growth in the mid-2000s, when output grew by over 4% a year, the economy added around 500,000 jobs a year. It wasn't quite 500,000. It was sort of just over 400,000, right in the middle there. But year after year, you could probably average it out to almost 500,000 per year. But even at that growth rate, so even if we were to return to the era of Thabo Mbeki, that would still not be enough. We would still add more unemployed people to this country every single year than what we actually give jobs to. And the reason for it is South Africa currently has 600,000 people every single year entering the job market. But we're not creating jobs for any of these people. In fact, South Africa is currently creating negative jobs, and the best results we've had is just over 100,000 jobs that we've been able to create in a single year. And the problem with a lot of the jobs that we're creating there, they're not full-time employment. They're not jobs for actual people that have degrees and that need these jobs. They're usually very menial labor focused or just seasonal work. So it's not even necessarily a job that you could say will fix the economy or help people get ahead. Now, Stanlib's chief economist Kevin Lings says, we now found that our economic growth is averaging less than 1% annual growth, and that is a major, major problem. We have gone back to where we were in 1994 in terms of growth, with a population growing at 1.4%, which is relatively high by global standards. Now, that is a good thing, right? If you look, If you look at the actual growth and you look at this chart here, I want you to focus only on this chart in the bottom left corner. That's a perfect, beautiful distribution of population. You have a lot of people that are quite young and actively working and actively entering the workforce, and you have very few people that are old. This means that the economy can grow, the young people can enter the job market in a country that's functioning, and they can support the old people. Because the whole thing with economics to understand is people from the age of 0 to 18 are completely dependent upon the economy. They don't add anything to the economy. Then from about 18 to almost 35, sometimes maybe even 40, especially in the modern economy, there are people that they're contributing their labor, right? So they can work, but they're not yet super contributors to sort of like the long-term income bracket. What they are incredible consumers, because people between the ages of 25 and 40 consume a lot. This is when people will buy homes, cars, TVs, all that stuff. And then you get to the age of 40, and this group is really the group to watch, because this is the group that will now invest. These are this is the group that now becomes managers, makes a lot of money, a great income tax bracket, and all the rest of it, right? And then once you hit 65, you become once again dependent upon the economy. The young people work so that the old people can retire. Now, South Africa doesn't quite have that because we don't have a full national pension scheme, which is a good thing in this country. But ultimately, the distribution there is really beautiful. How you know South Africa is struggling, though, is when you look at the actual growth rate in South Africa. South Africa is a developing nation. This means that we should have an incredibly high economic population growth rate. Our population growth rate currently, however, sits at 2.33 births per woman. That's not terrible. The best is to be about 2.5. You want to be at around 2.5 so that you can replace the people at least that are having the children. Because remember, when you have a man and a woman coming together, making babies, they have to have 2 kids just to replace them. If they can have 3, that's great, because now you have population growth, and more population growth means more economic growth and all the rest of it, because more people mean more geniuses that can come up with great solutions to all of the problems that we have. But at least at 2.33, we're still having more kids than people dying. So not bad. But when you compare that to places in Africa, also developing nations, you find that there, the growth rates are insane, right? You have places that have 6.9 children per woman. Now, most of these countries are failed countries, but the point here, because even if you look at the African states that aren't completely failed and at war with each other, which isn't a lot, they're at least having a lot more kids. The fact that South Africa, as a developing nation, is already starting to slip on the births per woman counter suggests that life in South Africa has become completely economically unsustainable for the vast majority of people. And therefore, even people who live in rural areas that don't have the costs associated to city life find it impossible to take care of more than 2, maybe 3 children at most. And that is a significant problem. Again, a problem fully on the backs of this bad government. But okay, so the point that Stand-Up's chief economist makes here, Kevin Lings, is that even with a 4% economic growth, which currently, with how everything sits, is about the base that this government could ever hope for, we're still not going to be able to create enough jobs for everyone. This country needs to get to around 8-9% economic growth with a government that wants to create jobs, that wants to allow business to do things. The other problem we have, and this is a big problem, the jobs that we do have isn't jobs that the people in our country can do. There's a lot of jobs that's being added to our country that either require incredibly high levels of education, which a lot of people actually don't have. The average in South Africa is about 46 to 47% of young people, 46 for men, 45 for men, and 46 for women in South Africa actually have a degree that is more than just secondary education. When you compare that to the rest of the world, you find that it's 79% for men and 81% for women that have a higher education. So South Africa is about half there for the rest of the world. The problem in South Africa is that we have this first world sector that is pretty much the only sector that is still growing in South Africa, and you have a third world sort of population in terms of the education that this population has. And this means that a lot of these jobs remain unfulfilled because they can't find people to actually do these jobs. The other problem is that a lot of students that go to university for degrees are doing degrees that are largely useless. And in this case, I'm actually not a fan of university. I went to university. I never got my degree. That's a whole different story. But I did go to university. And I think university is largely a waste of time. Not in terms of some professions probably do require an education from a university, but I actually am of the belief that the vast majority of jobs in the world does not require a university education. Take something like accounting, for example. Why can someone who likes doing accounting not just go work at an accountant's firm and then write an exam and become an accountant? Why must they go to university for 4 years to learn how to do books? Is that not something that they could learn just by doing it? Lawyers is another great example. Should you really have to go to university? You could replace all of that with a standardized exam test that tests the person when they're ready. So it's not like they have to do it in 4 years. As soon as they feel ready, they can go and do the exam. If they pass it, they prove to the government that, hey, I can do the job at hand. I understand the law and the legalities around it. And you don't have to go into this insane debt, because this is the problem. Because now every single job almost requires an education. Universities can charge whatever they want for this education, and most people have no sort of recourse for this. But that's a whole different discussion that I might get into at some point. The point I'm trying to make here is that South Africa is in a bad way, and we're in a bad way directly because of this government. We could be a phenomenally successful economy. We could be a phenomenally successful country if our government just got out of the way. That's all we need. Get out of the way. Let us actually produce. Let us actually make stuff. Because if you think about it, we have a government that is actively working against its people, actively trying to destroy this economy with BE, EE, affirmative action. None of this have worked, by the way. They've just managed to destroy the economy. And despite, or in spite all of that, we still find a way to survive. We still find a way to thrive. Imagine what we could do with a government that gets out of the way. If you like what I do and you think more people should have access to the kind of content that I make, please consider hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, and leaving a comment, because engagement matters. Not only that, I love reading your comments. As always, a massive shout out and thank you to all of the patrons and the YouTube channel members for your support. Without you, I literally wouldn't be able to do what I do. So to become a patron, hit the link in the description down below, or just the join button below this video for YouTube membership. As always, be good to each other, be kind to each other, and I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.